This is a wonderful building, and we're privileged to be working in. If there is such a thing as a congregational cathedral in your area, you are it. The people who built this building were visionaries and worked very hard to create a worship space of real grandeur, but also a sense of community in the way it's almost a lantern at nighttime and also invites people in. But everything in every great building that starts out with a good foundation oftentimes can be improved over time. And so what we're talking about here is building upon the beauty of what you have and making it better. And I think that's important to say right up front, because having been somebody who was brought up in a congregational church myself from a very young age, and working most of my life in churches, I know how much each and every one of us falls in love with the building in which we both celebrate wonderful things and also grieve and go through all sorts of emotional things together. And making a change in that space, however small or large, can sometimes be unsettling. So part of what I'm here to talk about with you today is not just specifics about organ design or acoustics or lighting. All of those are a very important part of what we're about here. But it's about taking the sacred space that you have and making it function better and making it more welcoming, more flexible, looking to the future and bringing younger people into your congregation, as every church has to do in order to continue its growth. The room itself poses a number of challenges to us, and although you can't see them, I'm actually wearing 3 hats today. One of my hats is as the designer for Fisk, Inc. I joined the firm as an apprentice in 1975 after dropping out of law school where I was bored to death. And I was a private organ student at the same time at Harvard. The instrument at Harvard Memorial Church was built by Charles Fisk in 1967, and it was a seminal instrument in the development of pipe organs in the United States, especially those with mechanical key action that goes back to the way the organs of Bach's day worked as opposed to electric action. And I was very enthralled with this instrument that was imposing, but also gave me a lot of trouble. So I cornered Charles Fisk one day and said, well, why doesn't Harvard Fisk do X, Y, and Z? And he said, if you think you can do better, you should come and work with us. And that's how it came about. I was very lucky as a kid to have 2 parents who were both very creative. My father was a jewelry designer. I come from 6 generations of jewelers. My mother was a women's apparel designer. I had 3 older sisters, which is where my psychology background started. And 2 of my sisters went through art school while I was in junior high. So in my household, if you wanted something, you drew it or you made it. And I had a fascination with all things architectural. I was one of those nerdy kids who sat with the blocks in the corner. I was fond of making lighting fixtures out of clay that would hang on the underside of our dining table. And he would let people come and sit down until I had cleared them off from underneath so they wouldn't get ruined. I used to take panels from my car models and put them in my mother's toaster oven and heat them up until I could shape them into shapes that I liked better. God knows what my parents were thinking. But in any case, that's a little bit of how I came around to doing the sort of thing that I do. So one of my hats is as a pipe organ designer. As I worked with Charles Fisk, every project that we did involved working on a new room or renovating an old room for a pipe organ. And that always involved architecture and working with designers and architects. And by the time I finished 5 years, it was my apprenticeship, they couldn't keep me out of the drafting room and the model room. And I was basically the person, except for Charles himself, who was working as a liaison with design professionals. One of our clients, who had a historic building in St. Paul, Minnesota, a Ralph Hadders Cram building, for those of you who know architectural history, was so impressed with what we had done in building the pipe organ and the scale model system that they commissioned me to work on their building, which had been substantially ruined in 1958 by successors to the Cram firm. And so for 8 years, I worked with the artisans, with the stained glass people, the stone people, the blacksmiths, sometimes 2 generations later of the same artisans who had built the building in 1914. And that 8-year period working on that building was my architectural training. I never actually did an architectural degree. I basically learned the old way as a builder and as an apprentice. So that's one of my hats. The second hat grew out of that into establishing my own studio for liturgical design. And so when I look at a project like this, I don't just look at it from the standpoint of what would be nice for an organ. I think about how would I want to worship in that space? How does it work? How does it not work? And the third hat that I'm wearing somewhat reluctantly is for our acoustical consultant, David Kierkegaard. Those of you who are plugged into the musical world know that name. His father was considered one of the best acousticians of the late 20th century, and Dana has inherited that mantle. He is both architect and acoustician, trained in both. And he's one of the few people that I know who can visualize what something material will also do in terms of sound. And it is Dana's vision, as much as it is mine, that you see here at the front of the scale model. The organ itself and the shaping around it is the real change. And most of you have probably had a look, and I'm going to grab the pointer here for a moment. But there are 2 things that are very different from what you have today. One of them is that the organ has a very solid wood panel base, and it's a fairly tall base. The current organ is open with grill cloth, and sound from the choir and musicians here on the stage is absorbed into the organ and is not projected out into the room. So the choristers have a hard time with their sound because it's not coming back to them quickly and it's hard for them to blend. In order to help them do this even better, we have proposed, and this is something Dana has done many times in wide rooms like this, we've proposed a set of wings on either side. These wings would be analogous to what you would find in a concert hall, in which the angled walls are a help to the orchestra and to musicians on stage, to help them hear themselves with what acousticians like to call early reflections. That's a lovely term, you should hold the next cocktail party. And the shaping of a horn is very deliberate. As we all know, if you speak into a horn, it will amplify your sound. And for natural sound in the room, this horn-like shape is the tried and true way of projecting sound effectively without amplification into the space. These wings also have other functions. One of the primary ones is to place junk inside. We all know what happens when we have a church. We have stuff. And we have flexible seating up there, and we may have more flexible seating out here in the room. These 2 wing areas, which otherwise are sort of dead space for the stage, acoustically, these are not good places back here for musicians or speakers, and they're often never land. It suddenly takes an area of the building which is not paying rent, so to speak, and is giving a good function to that area, a place where the chairs, even the grand piano, we hope, will be able to slide in for storage. And so it's a win-win. There's also a third win in that these areas can also provide hidden places for uplighting in the room. eye as well. Greg Harris, for example, noted that when these fluorescents go on around the perimeter, it's not terribly pleasant. You end up with light in your eye instead of being able to focus on what's happening up at the front in the liturgical area. You're rather distracted. We can do better than this, and it's something that I think you will all enjoy when it gets done. I should touch on for a moment the liaison of my work at Dana's and the committees with LMN. Oftentimes, Dana and I work together on projects like this, and we've been doing it for a long time. But we have projects all over the country, and what we need, more often than not, is an architectural firm which is in the locale where the project is going on, and a firm that is collegial and good to work with. I had the great experience of designing the pipe organ in Benaroya Hall about 10 years ago, and as most of you know, that's an LMN building. And so when the question came up, who might we interface with to really pick up the ball and run with the nuts and bolts of putting this project together, I suggested LMN to the committee, and as it turned out, the committee unanimously chose them after doing a rigorous process of looking at other folks. And I cannot be more happy that we are working together as a team. That teamwork is something that runs through everything that we do in organ building. It takes about 30 or so people a year in our workshop to build an instrument like this. It's no one person can build the instrument alone. And so ego has to be put to one side, and the good of the instrument and the good of the project has to be put to the foremost. And personally, I wouldn't want to work any other way. I think it's a wonderful way to work in music and in architecture. And my friends at LMN are the same way. The instrument itself has gone through a very interesting design process. And as you can see from some of the photographs, it has changed quite a lot over the last 3 months. We started out with a design that was intended to have a very strong central element. Those of you who have seen the photographs can see what was in these early photographs. There was something that we often refer to as a tower, that is a grouping of pipes that are grouped together in a cluster. And the early designs had a very strong center tower. And there was a thought at the time that perhaps the shoulders of the suit of clothes that the organ stands in might be soft on the outsides. That concept beguiled us through the month of December, and it took us down some very interesting roads. But very gradually, it started to become apparent that what the room really wanted was something that picked up on the vertical lines of the columns and the beautiful tall windows in the space. And so very gradually, this somewhat broader, softer shouldered form morphed into something that was a little bit more vertical and a little bit more life, if you will, in terms of its weights. The individual weights were lighter overall and seemed to fit the room better. That hand-drawn piece eventually developed into the full-blown scale model that you see today. And there are quite a few interesting things that happen within it, which I'll describe to you. But before I describe those individual elements and where they came from and what they might mean to you, I have to tell you that inside the organ there are about 4,000 pipes. And what you actually see in the facade, in the front pipes, is only a small fraction, therefore, of the speaking pipes inside. Many people often ask me, well, what are those pipes doing in the front? And the answer is, they are like your lead singers in front of the chorus. Each and every one of them speaks. And they comprise two of the most important groups of pipes on the organ. We call those groups of pipes stops, which seems very counterintuitive. I realize that. They should be called ons. So that when you pull the knob, that group of pipes comes on. This goes back to a long history of organ building, in which the very, very earliest organs were not designed to control the pipes. They all spoke all at once. These organs were called blockworks. And from what we're told, they were very hard to live with. So organ builders developed ways of stopping the pipes from speaking, and that's where that oxymoron comes from. You use a stop in order to put something on. There are two stops in the facade. One of them is a set of pipes whose longest note, the 16-foot C, appears in this column here. This is a group of pipes which is played in the pedal, as well as on the bottom manual of the key desks. There are 3 keyboards on this instrument, and that is the leading bass voice of that division, as well as in the pedal. There is a second group of pipes represented in this area, and this is the mantra 8 for that first division on the organ, which is called the grate. It is the sound that you would most associate with supporting you in congregational singing, that lovely, firm, warm, full sound of what organ builders like to call a principal or a diapason. And so it's very important that these pipes are here, visible up front, unlike the instrument that you have today. They have a very important function. And how they're arranged is very much part of the organ's design. When I lecture about organ design, I sometimes refer to the pipe arrangement as being analogous to the skeleton of the body. You've got to, in some sense, if you're a sculptor, get the skeleton right before you can sculpt a person. You have to know something about anatomy, and you have to get that grouping of bones to work. That's part of my problem. I've got to arrange the bones, except in this case they happen to be pipes. And they can be arranged in many ways. And that arrangement is dependent upon what the room itself is really looking for. In this space, we have 3 of these tower groupings in a semi-round that are answered in a way, in a concerto, a theme can be answered by a counter theme, by a smaller organ, almost an organ in miniature, with 2 semi-round towers in its lower part. So there's a theme, a counter theme going on. Some people may ask, well, what are those round shapes doing in a room like this? A room of the 60s in which there are a lot of angled corners. But if you look around, the architect of this building used a lot of rounded shapes. The stairwell outside, the shape of the chapel, and even the faceted form itself is an expression of a semicircle. In your field of vision up the ceiling, you can see the radius up above me where the lighting is embedded. And it's like a circle at the center of a set of spokes, in this case the beams of your ceiling. And so semi-round shapes really do have a place in this room, and they make a rather beautiful statement in many ways. We wanted to evoke that. We also shaped the organ so that its angles, the flat in the middle and then the 2 angles on either side, are identical to the angles behind the organ. And each one of those round towers visually fits into the solid panel and the clerestory windows around them. The instrument is narrower than the organ that you see today, and it's a couple of feet deeper. But the narrowness of it allows the windows to completely frame the organ and lets a lot more light around it. The current organ has a completely flat top. The new instrument has a top whose shape is there aren't large empty areas. It's really more like one fabric, if you will. And in fact, there's actually a suggestion of fabric in the way the shape of the woodwork is made at the top. Not unlike the banners of the streamers that are crossing the room. A somewhat lilting, gentle quality that's easy on the eye. There are also a few hidden things going on here. One of them is in this upper area, in which the shape that appears all over the building, and which I was originally told was a dove, but yesterday I was corrected and told that it was meant to be a figure of Christ with his arms out, so see what you like. But that form appears in the upper part of the organ, with the pipe mouths forming the curvature at the bottom, and the pipes being covered by woodwork at the top, very much like an abstraction of the shape that appears everywhere in the building. It's quite deliberate. Most of the time, a really happy organ design, that is one that people find pleasing, is one where their eye eventually rests in the upper center of the instrument. After you're done looking at all the detail, if your eye comes to rest in that upper focal area, it tends to be most pleasing. And so we chose to put the symbol of the church that appears everywhere in the building, somewhat hidden and subtly, into that space. There's also a couple of interesting things happening with the pipe mouths in the lower area. They're forming another kind of a banner or streamer. There's a continuous line that runs through the pipe mouths here and into the middle. And your eye is oftentimes drawn into this area, which John Neschel described in one of our meetings as almost a little organ within itself. And those of you who are familiar with the old world, or at least New England congregational churches, will recognize the pediment that you often find at the front of a congregational church that looks like a Greek revival doorway. And more often than not, that pediment has a little peak on it and columns on either side. And a little bit of that is snuck into our middle, as well as an abstraction of a mountain, and being year by year, a little bit of that mountainscape is also hidden in the organ's design. The overall wish that we have for the instrument is that it will, for several centuries, because the mechanical action organ will last many centuries if well taken care of, will enhance worship in this building long after we're gone. And we take that responsibility very seriously. It's a great gift to the congregation, and one which I hope will spur wonderful changes for you. And I will hand over to Elizabeth.
Thank you very much.